Maybe let me first rewrite what we want to prove. So it's the theorem I already stated yesterday. We have a sequence of Q+1 regular graphs. The number of vertices is n, just as a notation, and we assume they are expanders and have few short cycles. So they converge in the local Wien sense to the Q+1 regular tree, infinite regular tree. We are interested in the eigenvectors of the adjacency matrix. And we want to prove something. So we have a test operator K that has to satisfy certain assumptions. So K has to be supported near the diagonal. So if K of xy non-zero implies that the distance between x and y must be bounded by some fixed quantity. And also we assume some bound on K. And we want to say that this matrix element approaches a quantity that depends only on the local weak limit. So we want to say that it approaches a quantity that depends only on the weak local limit of the graphs. So the goal would be to show that this is small, but we cannot prove it individually for each eigenfunction. So we are only going to prove it in an average sense. So the goal is to show that this quantity goes to 0. And the limiting quantity is expressed, so K lambda is the average of Kfxy times a function that depends only on the distance between x and y. So it's the spherical function of parameter lambda on the infinite regular tree, and as I said yesterday, it's also related to the Green function on the infinite regular tree. And in the case, so if in the special case where the operator K is just multiplication by a function A, so it corresponds to D equals 0, and this is just, in that special case, this is just the average of the function K. So in the special case, we have the uniform average. And as I started to do yesterday, we want to start with the first preparatory step is to replace so maybe, yeah, this is not the same phi, this is capital phi, this is the spherical function on the infinite regular tree. So the first step is to replace our eigenfunctions phi I by the eigenfunctions on the non-backtracking random walk. So we had the following picture that we started with the self-adjoint operator A, but we are going to replace it by a non-self-adjoint operator B, which is the generator of the non-backtracking random walk. So this one acts on L2 of the vertices, and this one is on L2 of the oriented edges. And its spectrum is a union of a real spectrum and some points that are on a circle. And what happens, we had the following formula that if we have an eigenvalue of A here, if we write it as, so we make a change of parameter, of spectral parameter. So this eigenvalue here becomes two eigenvalues of B, so Q 1/2 plus IS and Q 1/2 minus IS. So B has most of its spectrum on this circle. And also we had started giving a formula to, so if we have an eigenfunction here, it becomes two eigenfunctions of B by the following formula that f of, so if I have an oriented edge xy, f of xy is defined by phi of y minus some coefficient times phi of x. And if we choose epsilon to be a solution of the quadratic equation q epsilon plus 1 over epsilon equals lambda, we see just by a computation that we see that f, these two f's, for the two different roots are eigenfunctions of the non-backtracking random walk. And here actually the two roots are also explicit. They are q to the minus 1/2 plus or minus is. So now we want to prove something working with these eigenfunctions instead of the original ones. So now we have an operator. Let us start with an operator acting on the oriented edges. Is there a question? Is there a question?
No, but it was from the previous lesson. I could not understand how you associate the unique non-backtracking.
So this is a random. This is a random walk whose state space is the oriented edges. Yes. Oriented, and when you have an oriented edge, you are allowed to go to.
How do you decide the orientation from the?
No, you have you don't decide. You have to. You count each edge twice.
Okay.
So this edge can go to these three ones, and the reverse edge is also also belongs to the state space, and it can go to these three. So you just count each edge twice because it has two orientations. Okay? Is it strange?
No, but I'm not used to grasp it.
Okay. I'm not either. So yeah, for each edge you choose the two orientations, and if you are here, you are allowed to jump here, here, and here. And if you are on this edge with the opposite orientation, you are allowed to go here, here, and here. So it's not a self-adjoint operator anymore because you have this choice of orientation. And maybe what is important to note is that, so it's not self-adjoint, but the adjoint of, so B star is conjugate to B. So B star is conjugate to B just by the operation of reversing the edges. So this operator I is a unitary operator that just reverses the edges, and we will use that. So now we are going to work on L2 of the oriented edges. So if we have an operator, a bounded operator, so a matrix acting on this space, we will define. So I call it the quantum variance because it's called like that in the Schnirelmann theorem on manifolds, but I'm not sure the name is perfectly a good name, but it's okay. We define this quantity. So here we put, so we choose one sign. So we choose, for instance, so we choose a branch, we choose plus, for instance. So here I put an eigenfunction of B. I apply K, and on the other side, I put the same eigenfunction, but reversed. So I reverse it by the operation of edge reversal, and now this is an eigenfunction of B star. So we define this quantity, and we are going to make some geometric assumptions of K on K. So K now, so the matrix K, because it acts on oriented edges, so K is a matrix indexed by pairs of oriented edges. And I made the geometric assumption that K of B and B prime is non-zero only if there is a non-backtracking path of length D from B to B prime. So somehow it replaces this assumption. So this operator K that I'm going to consider is a bit special. So it can only go from B to B prime if I have a path of length D between these two oriented edges. And the theorem that we are going to prove is that, and also we always want K to be uniformly bounded. So we are going to prove that this quantity goes to 0. So for all such K, we're going to prove that for all such K, this quantity here goes to 0 and when n goes to infinity. And then there is another part of the proof that I will completely skip, that is to prove that this theorem implies this one. So maybe I call this theorem B and this is theorem A. And there is a part of the proof which I skip, which consists in proving that theorem B implies theorem A. And to do that, we have a result about eigenfunctions of the non-backtracking matrix. We invert it because we have this relation between the eigenfunctions. We try to go back from a result to F to a result to phi. Also, maybe something I should say now that so K is an operator, but I'm going to use also a more geometric way of seeing K. You see, because I'm assuming that my graph is locally tree-like, if I'm given two oriented edges, most of the time there is only at most one path of length D between them. So giving B and B prime determines only one path. So instead of saying, so I will juggle between two ways of seeing K. K is a matrix, but I can also say that K, I also say that K is a function on what I will denote BD. BD is just the set of paths of length D, set of non-backtracking paths of length D. Okay, so I see K in two ways. One, K is an operator, but I also see it as a function on the set of paths, somehow, of length D. So now the next step of the proof is to apply a certain quantum dynamics and to average under these dynamics. So what do I mean by that? I mean that because here I have eigenfunctions, they are invariant under, if I apply B, or if I apply epsilon times B, these eigenfunctions are invariant. So this quantity is invariant under certain dynamics. And I'm hoping to use some kind of ergodicity of this dynamics to see some averaging taking place. Okay, so the remark is that the quantity that I have here so this quantity here remains the same if I apply, just because of this equation, this quantity remains the same if I apply here epsilon times B to any power. And on the other side, here, I use the eigenfunction equation for I use the fact that this guy is an eigenfunction of B star, and here it also remains invariant if I apply any power of epsilon bar times B. So, okay, so I can apply this dynamical system if you want, and it doesn't change the quantity I'm studying. So yesterday, someone asked what is the analog of the wave equation, and for me it is more. So this operator epsilon times B. I think this is a kind of analog to the wave equation on a manifold that is used in the proof of the Schneermann theorem. Why is that? Because so B propagates at speed 1. But if you ever work with the wave equation, it doesn't only propagate at speed 1. There is also a damping factor, which is exactly 1 over square root of the area of the sphere of radius t. And this damping factor is exactly, you see it here. It's square root of the growth rate of the sphere. So this guy is quite similar to the wave equation, to the wave operator. So because of this invariance, I can say that the quantity that I want to study is unchanged if we apply an operator of this form. So I do not only apply such an operator, but I do an average of these operators. So t here is an arbitrary time. So t is fixed but arbitrary, and at the end we will need to take it large. And here we make a sum from L equals 0 to t minus 1. And we average over all these quantities, and this guy remains the same. And now we hope that because of this averaging, there will be some cancellations taking place in some sense, due to the expanding condition. Other questions? Okay, so now the next step, maybe I can call it getting rid of the loops, of the cycles. So the point here is that because our graph looks like a tree, when we calculate traces of operators, basically we can forget about the cycles. So I will. So I will show precisely what I mean, but the point is that when we calculate a trace, so see, this is not a trace because of the absolute value here, but we would want to reduce it to a trace calculation, and we need to know that when we do a trace calculation, we can neglect the cycles. So maybe I should say. So we can neglect the cycles in trace calculations. In other words, when we calculate traces, we can work on the tree instead of working on the graph. And let me show what I mean by that. So we have a finite graph here, but we want to work with its universal covering graph, which is the tree. So here we have the. So yeah, maybe okay. So it's. So this means that I have a tree. So the infinite tree sits above my graph. There is a projecting map, and I can write my finite graph as a quotient of the tree by some automorphism group. In other words, instead of working with a finite graph, I want to work on the infinite tree with periodic conditions. So maybe I'm not. So let's imagine here I have my infinite tree. In fact, it is there are many, it is paved by copies of my finite graphs. So here we have infinitely many copies of G. And so each of these finite part of the tree is in bijection with the graph. And to recover the graph, I just apply some periodic conditions to this finite domain. So this is I will call D one of these copy of G. And instead, for instance, of working with functions of G, instead of working with a function on the finite graph, I prefer to say, it's completely equivalent, I prefer to say that I work with a function on the infinite tree that has a periodicity condition. And instead of working, if I have an operator K, or maybe let me call maybe M. If I have an operator on the finite graph, I prefer to say, and it's completely equivalent, that I'm working with an operator on the tree that commutes with that preserves the periodicity condition. So this way, I prefer to do calculations on the tree. And the first lemma that I want to use is that if I have a matrix so here I'm working on the vertices of the graph. V of G. If I have a matrix, an operator on the finite graph, so as I say that I see it as an operator on the tree that preserves the periodicity condition. If this operator is carried near the diagonal, then if I want to calculate a quantity of the form, so sum over I of phi I m phi I. So note here that I don't put any absolute values, so this is really a trace, and W is a continuous function. So if I want to calculate such a trace, I can do it, I can neglect, I can neglect the loops, the cycles, sorry, I can neglect the cycles, and I can almost do the calculation on the tree up to some error terms that comes only from the short cycles. So this is almost the same as calculating the trace on the tree. So I replace this discrete sum by an integral. And here I compute the trace over So I sum the matrix elements of the operator on the tree over, so D is a copy of my graph in the tree. And here I average over the spectral projector on the tree, okay? And this is actually something explicit. It is, as I said yesterday, this is expressed in terms of this spherical function, or you can also express it in terms of the imaginary part of the green kernel. So it's actually, for the tree, it's really an absolutely continuous spectrum. And this is not exact, there is an error, but that comes from the short cycles. So there is an error coming from the short cycles. So let's see maybe why this is true. So let's do the case. So W here is any continuous function, but just let's do the case of a polynomial. So let's do the case of W of lambda equals lambda k. So this is a bit similar to an argument that Justin gave in his first class to study. So is it okay? When he studied the convergence of empirical measures, it was a bit similar. So we start with something that looks like sum of lambda I k phi I m phi I. But this is the 1 over n times the trace of the adjacency matrix to the k times m. And we know that the trace of a matrix is also the sum of diagonal elements. So I can also write this as the sum. So it's a double sum because I have two operators. So it's a sum over all pairs of vertices in my finite graphs of ak of yx, m of xy. Oops, maybe I should keep this. But now if I want, I can read, this is expressed in the finite graph, but if I want, I said I can also work in the tree by using periodic functions. So if I want, I can also rewrite this as 1 over n. Here, when one does that the first time, it's a bit confusing, but when working with periodic functions, this is exactly the same as writing the following. So now I sum over points in. So D is this fundamental domain. It's a copy of my finite graph inside the tree. So I sum over these. And now I have to sum over all. So now I work with the adjacency matrix of the tree. But now, when I'm lifting everything to the tree, here I have 2 points. Y tilde and Y double tilde that are not necessarily the same. The only thing I know is that that they are image of one another by gamma. So on the tree we should sum. So x is here. X is here. We have a point Y in the tree and another point Y double tilde in the tree. But now we know that that in the finite graph they should be equal, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the same in the tree. So these 2 points here are not necessarily equal. The only thing we know is that that they are equal modulo gamma. So they are image of one another by the periodicity condition. And what do we know? So we have some geometric constraints on these points. We know that the distance between H, so the distance here should be less than D because of the constraints on the matrix M. If we want this term to be non-zero, the distance should be less than D. And if we want this term to be non-zero, the distance should be less than K. Otherwise, if these two conditions are not satisfied, there is no contribution here. So finally, a term like that appears. So if we want this term to be non-zero, either we should have, well, there are some diagonal terms, so either we should have that the 2 points y tilde and y double tilde are equal, so this is a diagonal term, or, so if we look at this picture but we project it back to the finite graph, this means, so this point and this point in the finite graph are the same. So if I project this picture back in the graph, I will have a loop from x to y. So this path will be of length d, this path will be of length k. So it means that necessarily the off-diagonal terms correspond to loops or to cycles of length d plus k. Okay, so the non-zero terms are either diagonal terms or they correspond to short cycles. But we know that there are few short cycles. So okay, maybe. So actually, in this sum, there is the diagonal part, where this point here and this point are equal, plus an error that is exactly the number of cycles of length d plus k. So we know that this quantity goes divided by n goes to 0. And what is left here is now a trace, so I can express it. So this is now a trace on the tree, so I can express it. Yes?
When you replace x by x tilde and y by y tilde, should you also replace m by some operator on the tree?
Yes, I said that yeah. So this.
What's the relation between m tilde and m?
I will tell you afterwards. If you have an operator on the graph, you can always find an operator on the tree that preserves gamma periodicity and that gives back the original operator. It's not unique. You can write a formula. I can show you. So usually there is no unique way of doing that, but if there are few short cycles, there are not so many ways of doing that. So, okay, so now this is really a trace. So if you look at this quantity here is what, so what we have here is exactly the trace, but now calculated on the tree of m tilde, the adjacency matrix of the tree to the k, times a compactly supported function, which is just the characteristic function of D. And now, because it is a trace on the tree, I can express it the way I showed before, using the spectral projector on the tree. Okay, so this is saying that when I calculate a trace of something, I can work on the tree modulo some errors that are negligible. And in the same spirit, so this was for functions. So here I was working on the original graph, but if I'm working with a non-backtracking random walk, I will need the following lemma, that if I consider the variance of k, remember that it was defined as so maybe I should put a square here. It's slightly more convenient because I can do Cauchy-Schwarz, and it doesn't change the final statement. So I'm interested in that. I want to say, so this is not a trace because of the absolute value, so this is not very convenient, but I want to get rid, so if I do Cauchy-Schwarz, this is going to be less than a constant times the sum over I times the norm of k fj square. So this is by Cauchy-Schwarz, I get an inequality. But this now I can rewrite. So this is equal to the sum of fj k star k fj. And this is almost a trace. My only problem is that the fj are not an orthonormal basis because they are eigenfunctions of B. B is not a normal operator, so fj are not an orthonormal basis, so it's not exactly a trace. However, I think I'm just going to say what is the result. We can still almost do as if they were orthonormal, and at the end, what we see, and I will also need to put some weight here for a more general statement. What the lemma says is that this quantity can be bounded in terms of something that is only expressed on the tree, modulo some error coming from short cycles. So I can bound this by C over n. So there is a spectral integral now for the spectral measure of the tree. So this is the spectral measure for the tree, and here what I have is the sum of k of b prime square over all pairs of oriented edges in the tree. And I want B to have its origin again in my finite fundamental domain. And this is not exactly true. There is an error coming from short cycles. So we are now that we have done all this preparation, we are almost done. So this is true. I want to apply this inequality starting from the average, starting from this average thing. So instead of applying just to k here, I want to apply it to k that is averaged under the quantum dynamics. So if I apply lemma 2 to this expression, what we get is that the variance of k, and this is true for arbitrary, remember, t here is arbitrary. So what I'm going to write is true for arbitrarity. So this quantity is going to be less than, so maybe here I should skip all the intermediate calculations, and I will ask you to believe me that if I apply this lemma to this quite complicated expression and work a little on this, I find the following upper bound. So I have always an integral which is over the spectral measure for the tree. And now I have 1 over t square sum. There is a constant here which doesn't matter. And here I have, so I have something which is quadratic in k and which looks like this. So what is this? Now I can erase this. So remember I said that instead of seeing k as an operator, I want to see k as a function on the set of paths of length d. So here now that is what I am doing. So here I'm working on the set of non-backtracking paths of length d. And I see now k as a function on this set. S is a stochastic operator at yes.
This is bounding the genome of k and lambda.
This is bounding
The sum over bb prime of kb prime square. I mean, I don't understand why is lambda.
So lambda is here because I have always I have this. So lambda is hidden here. So S if you want, corresponds to a Markov chain on the set of paths of length d, and this Markov chain is just consists, if you have a non-backtracking path of length d, what you do is you erase the first segment and you add randomly one of the q following segments. So Sk at path omega is 1 over q times the sum of all followers of omega. And followers means that I obtain omega prime from omega by erasing the first segment and adding randomly the last one. So this is very similar to the non-backtracking van der Waals, except that it's the state space is already the set of paths of length d. So this is a stochastic operator, and it has a spectral gap because of the expanding assumption. So here I use the expanding assumption to say that if k is orthogonal to constant function, I can say that that the powers of S applied to k decay exponentially fast. So it already tells me that if k is orthogonal to constant, then this sum is small. But if k is constant, this is even better, because if k is constant, if k is equal to a constant function, I have that S of a constant function is a constant function. But here we can use this phase here to get cancellations. Because we have a geometric sum of ratio, we have a geometric sum, so we get cancellations from this term here. So the only places where this term could go wrong is the only places of the spectrum where this term doesn't induce cancellations is for Q 2is equal to plus or minus 1. But this is at the edge of the spectrum. In the bulk of the spectrum, this term is never plus or minus 1. So no, it's actually when it's 1 that we get into problem. But this corresponds to the edge of the spectrum. So inside the spectrum, if we stay inside the spectrum, we can say that. So at the end, we get cancellations, and we get that this is less than the norm of k squared over t. Plus, there is always some error term coming from path from short cycles. And this now we are done because we have bounded this thing. We have bounded it by something over t, and t was arbitrary. So it shows that it goes to 0. And if you see, if you want to make it, you can try to optimize things by making t grow with n, but you get into trouble in the error term because the error term here will depend on the number of cycles of length t, or t plus d. So you have a competition between this term, which is good, but this term can be bad if t is too large. So this ends the proof. And okay, see, I have a few minutes left. Let me try to just briefly describe what we did for non-regular graphs. So with Mostafa Sabri, a few years ago, we decided to try to see if something similar could be done for non-regular graphs. And you see that here the main problem, the first step that we used in that proof is to transform eigenfunctions of the adjacency matrix into eigenfunctions of the non-backtracking random walk. And it would be maybe a bit too optimistic to think that you can do this in general, but we wondered if there is something in the same spirit that can be done. So what we tried to do, if we have now an arbitrary graph, and so we consider its adjacency matrix, but actually the construction also works if you add a potential, so it can be also a Schrödinger operator. We are interested in eigenfunctions of this operator, and we wondered if there is a way to transform this eigenfunction into a function that lives on the oriented edges and is an eigenfunction of a non-backtracking matrix. And we looked for a formula similar to the one on non-regular graphs, on regular graphs. So we looked for f in the form that f of an edge should be a linear combination of phi at the terminus of the edge and phi at the origin. And we hope to find such a transformation that has the property that now f, so if phi is an eigenfunction of the Schrödinger operator, we want f to be an eigenfunction of the non-backtracking matrix. And what happens for a regular graph is that here you can find a constant that works. But if you try on a non-regular graph, it's very rapidly obvious that it's not possible. But maybe it doesn't really matter that this thing is constant, so we try to put here a function that is also a function of the edge and see see if it works. And if you do that, you find that if you want the construction to work, you need this function that we call zeta to satisfy some quadratic equations. And so there is one equation for each edge. So you want that if you apply the non-backtracking matrix to zeta plus 1 over zeta, you find lambda. And if you find such a function zeta, you will have that bf is going to be equal to f over zeta. So f is not going to be an eigenfunction of b, but is going to be an eigenfunction of b times a weight that is the function zeta. So maybe it's not so bad. But the main problem is to be able to construct this function zeta. So in the regular case, we take zeta equal constant, and we have just one quadratic equation to solve. But here we have one equation per edge, so it doesn't look very encouraging. So first, when I first saw this set of equations, I was not very optimistic, because first, how will we find a solution? And then even if we find a solution, we need to know how this so now the solution will also depend on n, and we need to know if this solution doesn't become too crazy when n goes to infinity. So first I was not very optimistic, but then I realized that this equation is everywhere in the literature on spectral theory on trees. It is actually the recursion formula for the green function on the universal covering graph of Gn. So we know actually a solution of this equation. Maybe not for lambda real, because we don't know if we have an arbitrary tree, as we saw yesterday. We don't know if the green function is well defined on the real axis. But we can add a small imaginary part that will be an error term, and we can, if we add a small imaginary part, we can explicitly solve this equation, and it's going to be really quite explicit. It's going to be given by the green function on the universal covering graph for the parameter lambda plus I eta. So it's not so bad. And finally, and we did that. We tried, so with this function zeta, we tried to put it in, we tried to do basically the same proof, and it becomes even more nasty. But at the end, we found the following abstract result, that if we take any sequence of graphs Gn with the adjacency matrix, or more generally with the Schrödinger operator. So again, they are deterministic. But as we saw in Justin's lecture, we can always assume that they converge in the local weak sense to a limit, and this limit is a random graph, and a random rooted graph. So even if we have a deterministic sequence of graphs, the limit is going to be a random rooted graph. So we assumed always that there are few short cycles, which implies that the limit is actually a random tree. And the local weak limit, as we saw yesterday, it implies the convergence of empirical spectral measures, but in fact, it also implies convergence of all of the distribution of all local quantities. So in particular, this function zeta that depends on n that we built in the previous slides, it has, in distribution, it has a limiting law. And what we want, so in the proof, we want to know that zeta doesn't go to infinity, but also that it doesn't go to 0, because we run into trouble if we have to divide by 0. So we put a super strong assumption on the limiting law of zeta. Because, so we want an assumption that prevents zeta to be too large or too small, so we assume that it has moments of all order, both positive and negative. But already, let's see, we wanted to see what it gives if we assume this. So this is very strong, and it's known to imply that for the limiting random tree, almost surely, so we assume this for lambda is in a certain given interval. And it's known to imply that for the limiting random tree, the spectrum is almost surely absolutely continuous in I. So it's not only the limiting integrated density of states that it's absolutely continuous, but almost surely we have absolutely continuous spectrum. So so this is a super strong assumption, but I'm not too unhappy with it for two reasons. First reason is that it's not completely delirious to assume that there is, if we want to prove some kind of delocalization result for eigenfunctions, it's not completely delirious to assume that the spectrum is absolutely continuous in some sense. And the second reason why I'm not too unhappy with it is that the same condition appears in papers by Eisenman and Warcel, and they have been to show it for certain specific models. And under this assumption, and we always assume that there are expander graphs. So under this assumption, we prove the following. So again, I'm interested in, so here I just wrote it for a function. So A is a function on the graph. We are interested in phi j, A phi j, and we show that it approaches a quantity. So here, so what we show is that for most eigenfunctions, we have that phi I, A phi I is close to the average of A for some measure that still depends on n, so it's not still the definitive form. So here we have a measure mu n that depends on n because it is expressed in terms of the green function of the universal covering graph of Gn. So if the graph is regular, the universal covering graph is always the tree, it doesn't depend on n. Here it still depends on n, so we cannot stop here, otherwise it doesn't prove so much. But we know what we prove also is that if, and it depends also on, so it depends also on the eigenvalue. So we show that if we have a subset in the graph Gn that is macroscopic, so that has cardinality more than a positive proportion of n, so more than alpha n, we prove that the limit, that mu n of lambda n is bounded below by some positive constant. And in fact, I think this is alpha 1 plus epsilon. So this measure is less explicit than in the uniform case because it is expressed in terms of the universal covering graph of each Gn, but we know that if we have a set of cardinality comparable to n, the measure of this set can never go below a certain constant. So it still says that some kind of uniformity of this measure. And I think I have to stop, but just the last slide, just to say that it's a general abstract result. Of course, we need examples where it applies. And as Justin said yesterday, it's extremely difficult actually to find examples with absolutely continuous spectrum. Actually, there are very few known examples. Fortunately, so there is some work by Keller, Eisenman, Sims, Warcel. So there are examples of deterministic trees that have absolutely continuous spectrum. So basically, they are called trees of finite clone type. So they have trees with a certain kind of periodicities. And the good thing is that, so this is just a very specific family of deterministic examples, but the good thing is that it's known that the absolutely continuous spectrum persists under small random perturbations. So for these examples, it's known that the absolutely continuous spectrum continues to exist after small perturbations. So it gives a slightly larger class of examples. And I think it's time for me to stop.